Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Saturday, August 16th, 2025, 680 days since October 7th of 2023. We've been doing these daily updates for 680 days as we seek a comprehensive, permanent ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the occupation and the atrocities that have had such a devastating effect on so many people. Updates of news from the past 24 hours or so. Today, I did an interview with an Egyptian news agency, and some of the things that I talked about were a summary of what continues to be the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, talking about what starvation looks like in Gaza, talking about the potential implications of whether or not, of what would happen if Gaza City is completely occupied by the Israeli military. So last Friday, Israeli Security Cabinet approved plans for the taking over of Gaza City, and the Israeli military has now begun to mobilize and prepare for those next steps. This would result in the displacement of 600 to 800,000 Palestinians from the north of the enclave. And there are 5 main points. I've talked about these before, but they're important that the Netanyahu government is saying they're demanding. 1 is the disarming of Hamas. 2 is the return of all hostages, dead and alive. It's believed that there are about 50 remaining hostages in Gaza, perhaps as many as 20 or so of them still living. The 3rd requirement is the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. The 4th, that Israel would have security control over the Strip. And 5 is that there would be a new government in place in Gaza, neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. The deadline for the first phase of the newly approved Israeli operation was set to be October 7th, 2025, which would be the 2-year anniversary of the attacks by Hamas. North Gaza and Gaza City have borne the brunt of the artificial humanitarian crisis that has engulfed the Strip. Food, water, medical supplies have been deliberately restricted. There are large swaths of the population that are already facing famine conditions. Starvation is being used as a weapon of war, and it's a violation not only of moral principles, but also international humanitarian law. International law is unequivocal. The occupation of Gaza is illegal. Under the 4th Geneva Convention, the occupying power bears the obligation to protect civilians, to ensure access to food and medical care, and to refrain from collective punishment. Nothing in the proposed actions by Netanyahu and his government indicate that those obligations would be met. On the contrary, every indication is that the occupation of Gaza City would prolong displacement, prolong hunger and death on a massive scale. Numerous Israeli leaders, including former executives and security establishment, agree that the takeover of Gaza City should be opposed. As does Churches for Middle East Peace. We condemn it completely. Earlier in August, roughly 600 retired Israeli security officials, including former intelligence chiefs, urged President Donald Trump to press Israel to end the war in Gaza. They stated that Hamas no longer poses a strategic threat, and thus they're calling for action to end the war, to return the hostages, and to stop the suffering. Their warning comes as Netanyahu is seeking this military expansion, and while ceasefire talks are largely stalled, and as major Jewish and civil rights groups are cautioning that the seizing and governing of Gaza City would not only endanger the lives of Palestinians, but also hostages and Israeli soldiers. Wednesday of past week, Palestinians reported the heaviest bombardments in recent weeks in the areas around Gaza City. This was just hours after that declaration by Netanyahu's security cabinet to expedite the IDF's plans for that offensive. Around 12,000 children under the age of 5 in Gaza are suffering from acute malnutrition, and the number of hunger-related deaths is increasing. According to a report from August 16th, the Health Ministry of Gaza has said that in the last 24 hours, at least 11 Palestinians died of starvation in the past day. That number includes 1 child. The ministry said that the number of Palestinians who've died of hunger and malnutrition since the beginning of the war is now 251 people. 108 of those are children who've died of starvation or malnutrition. Humanitarian assistance must be allowed into Gaza. This week, more than 100 aid and advocacy organizations, including Save the Children, Oxfam, and our organization, Churches for Middle East Peace, called for an end to the weaponization of aid. We're calling on states and donors to press Israel to end the weaponization of aid, including through bureaucratic obstruction, such as the INGO registration requirements, to insist that international NGOs are not forced to share sensitive personal information about their Palestinian staff, which is in violation of the General Data Protection Regulation. This would compromise the safety of their staff, and the independence of these aid organizations as a condition for delivering aid. Finally, we're demanding the immediate and unconditional opening of all land crossings and that the conditions for the delivery of life-saving humanitarian aid be met. According to data from the United Nations, only 1.5% of cropland on the Gaza Strip is accessible and suitable for cultivation, which further adds to the hunger and starvation that's being experienced in the Strip. And meanwhile, the government of Israel is emphasizing expanding their militarized distribution sites and Gaza Humanitarian Foundation operations. They're talking about restoring the European Gaza Referral Hospital in Khan Yunis and restoring the water line in Rafah. In other words, the south of Gaza does not have the capabilities to take 600,000+ Palestinians who are going to be displaced from North Gaza. And so Israel is taking actions to try to increase the capacity of the south of the Strip to be able to take in those additional refugees, many of whom will die if they're forced to relocate yet again. There's significant international opposition to the takeover of Gaza City. I've been talking about this a lot the past week. Egypt has warned that the takeover will lead to the execution of hostages. Even inside of the Israeli government, there is quite a bit of resistance, including the National Security Advisor, Hanegbi, who's a confidant to Netanyahu, who opposes the plan for the expansion of military operations in Gaza. Conservative Jewish groups in the United States are opposing that plan. This even includes the American Jewish Committee, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, who've warned that the Israeli takeover of Gaza would endanger hostages and innocent Palestinians. Nonetheless, the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, Eyal Zamir, is fully mobilized and prepared to expand the operations in Gaza since the Security Cabinet made a green light. Just a couple other specific updates of the last 24 hours related to Gaza. We know that the Israeli army is gearing up outside of Gaza City. There's 2 additional brigades that are now operating in the Zaytun neighborhood. This is on the outskirts of Gaza City. This is as the army is expanding their operations there. According to the health ministry, 51 people were killed in the last 24 hours, at least 17 of those while waiting for humanitarian aid. We know 1 child has died from malnutrition. On Friday, 127 food aid packages were airdropped as a part of an operation that was cooperation between Israel, the UAE, Jordan, Germany, Belgium, France, Italy, and Singapore. That's almost 1 country per aid package. We know that airdrops are wildly inexpensive and highly ineffective in terms of mechanisms for distributing aid. Israeli troops have sealed a tunnel that's over 4 miles long in Beit Hanun in the north of Gaza, the IDF reported. And the UN, Gaza Humanitarian Aid Foundation, and the IDF must work together to provide aid to Gaza's population. This is according to the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew. He was the ambassador under Biden and President Biden's special envoy for Middle Eastern Affairs, Humanitarian Affairs, David Satterfield. They said that in an article that was published in Foreign Affairs magazine. A couple of updates from the occupied West Bank. In social media and in Israeli news, it's been reported that Smotrich revealed plans to confiscate thousands of dunams of Palestinian land and to invest billions in order to be able to settle an additional 1 million Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. Settlers have also reportedly attacked 2 Palestinian villages in the West Bank overnight. In the village of Susia in the West Bank, there were clubs and stones used by settlers, according to local reports. The attackers fled the scene before Israeli forces could arrive. And in the second reported attack, settlers were said to hurl Molotov cocktails at a Palestinian village. Ben Gvir has been filmed visiting the cell of the Palestinian convict Barghouti and taunting him. That was published by the Times of Israel. There's a video of that online. And the former IDF general has called the Palestinian death toll in Gaza necessary. This was in a recording that was published in Israeli news. It was also shown on Israel's Channel 12. The former Israeli military chief said that the high number of Palestinian deaths is necessary for future generations. In a recording, the Major General Reservist Haliva is heard saying that 50 Palestinians should die for every victim of the Hamas attacks on October 7th. There's no choice. They need a Nakba every now and then in order to be able to feel the consequences, he said. He was referring to the 1948 displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians on what would become later the border of the state of Israel. He said, I'm not saying this out of revenge, but just as a message for future generations. Police have assaulted the Arab deputy mayor of a town in the north of Israel. 3 people were arrested at a protest for the Gaza war. There's been quite a bit of crackdown, even as hundreds and thousands have been protesting the war in Gaza and different parts of Israel. Saturday is the day that most of those protests occur. The former IDF intelligence chief says that he would have accepted the security establishment's assessment ahead of October 7th. This is according to the military intelligence directorate in Israel, Haliva. It would not have made a difference if he'd woken up ahead of the October 7th attacks. Even if the chief of staff had woken me up in the night, I would have said that I accept the assessments of the division commander, the command and the Shin Bet, and anyone else who says otherwise is a liar. So there's a lot of question in Israel about whether or not the October 7th attacks could have been prevented. The fact that he planned the situation assessment for 8:30 a.m. means that anyone who gave him information would feel that something unusual was happening, but it would not be immediate. Haliva added that he did not think anyone was willfully negligent, but he does place blame on the Shin Bet security service. They're responsible for Gaza, and it's like, if not greater than, the intelligence directorates. Where's the Shin Bet with all of its billions, he asked. Moving on to Lebanon, the IDF said that they attacked a military structure and underground infrastructure at a Hezbollah site. They said military activities were identified in the south of Lebanon, and the prime minister of Lebanon has accused the Hezbollah chief of threatening to start a civil war within Lebanon. So the prime minister, Salam, accused the secretary general of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, of threatening to start a civil war. There's no one in Lebanon today who wants that, and the threats or hints of it are completely unacceptable. Naim Qassem said the group would not allow the Lebanese government to disarm it, and he said there will be no life in Lebanon if moves against Hezbollah are taken. Defense Minister Israel Katz addressed Lebanese Prime Minister Aoun in a statement saying, "We see you and the Lebanese government as directly responsible for enforcing Lebanon's sovereignty and upholding the ceasefire agreement." He was speaking about how Israel will act forcefully against any violation of the ceasefire agreement. It's worth noting that Israel continues to maintain sites in South Lebanon, so Israel itself is in violation of that ceasefire agreement that Defense Minister Katz is speaking of. Only one international response. Denmark's Prime Minister Frederiksen said she does not rule out sanctioning Netanyahu or even Israel as a whole. And in the U.S., a member of Congress has become the most senior U.S. Democrat to call Israel's actions in Gaza genocide. This is the House Minority Whip, Catherine Clark. She's the second-ranking Democrat in the House behind Hakeem Jeffries. She referred to Israel's actions in Gaza as genocide. She's the most senior Democratic official to use that language. There's a video of a private event that was reviewed by Haaretz, and Clark told a Quaker group, a friends meeting in her home state of Massachusetts, "We each have to continue to have an open heart about how we take action in this time to make a difference. Whether that's stopping the starvation and genocide and destruction of Gaza, or whether or not that means we're working to stop the redistricting that's going on, taking away the vote from the people." She continued and said, "It's exhausting to do all of it, but we have to." Just to close with an update on Christians in the Middle East, if you've not seen the interview with Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos that she did with Tucker Carlson recently, I'd encourage you to watch it or read the transcript online. TRT World, the Turkish news outlet, described the interview by saying, "An Orthodox nun gives U.S. conservatives a rare glimpse about lives of Palestinian Christians." Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos speaks to Tucker Carlson on Israeli occupation, land seizures, and armed resistance in the occupied West Bank. Mother Stephanopoulos has lived in the West Bank in the town of Bethany since 1996, and she talked about how Palestinian Christians and all Palestinians face restrictions of movement, land confiscation, and violence from Israeli forces and settlers. She talked about being closed off because of the wall built on Palestinian land. She said there's a Christian home for boys that Israelis just took over and they cut up to make a part of the wall. The interview examined Christian Zionism, the belief that Jewish control over the Holy Land is necessary for the second coming of Christ, which she said disregards local Christian communities. And she ended by questioning Israel's media restrictions. Why can't reporters go into Gaza? They call large portions of the West Bank military zones. What kind of press freedom is that? What is Israel trying to hide? Mother Agape has been experiencing a significant amount of backlash since the interview. It's worth noting she's George Stephanopoulos' sister. George, of course, is the well-known TV commentator who also rose to prominence as the communication director of Bill Clinton's White House. And I just wanted to call attention to that video. In some ways, it's gone viral, but there's also been a lot of criticism about how her words may or may not be true. And then when Tucker Carlson asked if there are any groups in the U.S. that are doing the work of advocating for Christians in the Holy Land, Churches for Middle East Peace was the first group that Mother Agapia mentioned. I would call attention to this interview as an example of something that you can use to write op-eds in your local news outlets. Use the talking points to be able to raise the issue of how Christians are leaving the Holy Land because of the occupation, because of oppressive policies against Palestinians, and not because of Muslim persecution. Might God go before us as we seek to advocate for an end to all atrocities in the Middle East, in Gaza, and everywhere. In the name of Christ, amen.